With great power comes great responsibility.
Compromise where you can. Where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right, even if the whole world is telling you to move, it is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say, no, you move.
Never step onto the battlefield of ideas unprepared. Before you enter the fray, you need a plan. And there's no better place to get one than right here on Tactics with host Caleb Colquitt. The Situation Room goes live now on News Radio 1440.
Welcome in, everybody. I do apologize. I've been very sick today, and hopefully that won't be too much of a hindrance. Because of that, we're just going to have sort of an abbreviated episode, but don't worry. Hopefully, typically I heal pretty quickly, so hopefully I'll be on the mend and be back in full form. But right now, I thought it was best. I think I can squeeze out just doing one story for this, so hopefully it won't impede me too much. Thank you so much for being with us here on Tactics, and probably won't be taking any calls today, but I do appreciate your patience. So I did want to cover this story. There are 2 Tuscaloosa police officers today that are actually suing Buzzfeed. So you all are aware Buzzfeed, the same people that brought you, 16 things you didn't know about friends behind the scenes, also actually do some hard news reporting. And to be honest, some of it's pretty good. Like, looking back into the election in 2016, there were a lot of fairly big news stories that were actually broken by Buzzfeed. So I know it's weird to think of them as an actual news organization, but they are. And so even though they do a lot of the weird kooky stuff, like I was talking about, different cat videos and like what if superheroes existed in real life, that kind of stuff. Yeah, they do that, but they also actually do what most people would consider hard journalism as well. It's a little weird that those two things are in the same place, but they do that as well. So the thing is, there are these 2 police officers out of Tuscaloosa that are actually suing them for libel. And you may recall that there was this really big story that happened about an alleged rape victim that committed suicide a while back. She was a student at the University of Alabama, originally from Texas, and Megan Rodini, she was there and at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa at the time when she alleged that she had been raped by a very powerful, very influential man in the community. And I remember covering this story ad nauseum. We talked about it for a couple of days, I think, when this story came out and there was new information on it. And so what they are doing is they are going out and they're actually suing BuzzFeed for their reporting on this particular case. Now, to give you a little bit of a refresher course in what was going on there, the evidence really on both sides were kind of flimsy. And I remember talking about this quite a bit. If you look at it, oddly enough, there are holes on both sides of the story, and that happens sometimes, probably more than you would expect, in a lot of these criminal court cases. Because there are some things that objectively just don't really add up on both sides. Both the side of the man that is being accused of rape and the woman that was accusing him of rape. And I won't go through all the details again. I've already done that story, and we're really focusing more on the police officers and BuzzFeed and their handling of it. But suffice it to say, if you want to do your own research on this story, it is actually a pretty fascinating case. But suffice it to say, there were several inconsistencies with both stories. And the truth, I'm guessing, is somewhere in the middle because of that, because there were some discrepancies. But neither one of the stories sounded ultimately entirely credible to me. And so it was one of those cases that it's very difficult. And I think one thing that we need to note here is that this is one of the reasons that cases of things like rape, like a sexual assault, are very, very difficult to deal with. And the reason that I say that is they almost always occur in a situation where it's essentially his word against hers. Now, sometimes there's forensic evidence, sometimes there's video footage, sometimes there are people around, but most of the time that is not the case. Usually what happens in these situations is it's pretty much the victim's case or the alleged victim's case against the alleged rapist. And that's it. And that really is tragic because there's a lot of these cases that probably the person that perpetrated the woman unfortunately gets to walk free because there's just a lack of evidence on that part. Now, I'm still a big believer in innocent until proven guilty. It's one of the foundations of the judicial system in America. But I got to say, it really burns me up that is the case, that there's probably a lot of actual rapists that, because these situations occurred where there was nobody around, that took place. And there's an underlying social problem with that, with us just disregarding marriage and trying to disconnect sexual, relationships from marriage. Obviously, that's not true in all cases, but in several cases, I think that people putting themselves in this situation, both men and women, are because we have become far more comfortable with sexual relationships outside of marriage. But I'm not going to get into that right now because it's really beyond the scope of this story. But if you'll remember, T.J. Bunn, who was the alleged rapist in this particular story, he's a very rich heir to a construction company that's very influential in the state of Alabama. The company that his father and I believe his grandfather as well owned and built is very influential in our state. They do a lot of government contracting work. I mean, these are very well-connected, wealthy people. And they're very prominent people in the city of Tuscaloosa. So because of that, and because that's where the allegation goes, essentially what Buzzfeed insinuated pretty strongly was that the police officers, the reason that they did not move forward with the evidence for this case was because this was a very wealthy, very influential person in the community of Tuscaloosa. And because of that, they were very hesitant to move forward on these charges because this guy was wealthy and well-connected, and they were afraid of either their jobs or public perception or whatever it was. The insinuation from this article at BuzzFeed kind of hinted very strongly at that. But if you want my takeaway from the whole thing, the whole story, beyond just this defamation case, I just really doubt that it's possible to even know what happened, even if we dig into the case as much as we can with all the available evidence that I've seen, that I've looked into. I think it's sadly just one of those cases where there is no way to know for sure what happened. There was a lack of evidence to convict this guy. There's really no way you can conclusively prove that he raped this girl, and especially considering that the victim was very intoxicated, according to her own testimony, it would be hard for you to take that witness even at face value just because of the difficulty in being able to discern that, because she was in a state of intoxication. So there's both stories here that really just don't pan out, and I hate it, but I don't think that there's ever a way for us as third-party individuals that weren't there to know exactly what happened. Now, if he did rape her, if that crime actually took place, it still doesn't mean that the police were just looking the other way because this kid was rich. Now, I'm not saying that either one of those things makes it okay, because maybe the rape happened, maybe it didn't, and whether it happened or not, if the police held back, in other words, the police didn't move forward with the investigation the way they should have and do their jobs because they were afraid of how influential this guy was and how wealthy and prestigious this guy was, then that's a problem regardless of whether the crime happened or not. And so you have to kind of separate these issues in your head, that the one doesn't necessarily result in the other. In other words, maybe he raped her, maybe he didn't, but regardless of whether that's true or not, you have to ask the question, did the police officers move forward and do their job, or did they hesitate on it because of the prestige that this guy had? And so these are two completely separate issues, both important issues, both big questions that we need to ask ourselves, but issues that are unconnected in the sense that one doesn't necessitate the other. So even if this guy did happen to rape her, that doesn't mean that the police were necessarily looking the other way. Like I said, there was a huge dearth of information. There was a lack of conclusive evidence to move forward with this guy, and the police officers may have hesitated to move forward, not because of who the guy was. They might not have even known who the guy was. I mean, they knew the name, but maybe they didn't recognize the name or something like that. Maybe part of the reason that they didn't move forward is just because there wasn't a whole lot of evidence that the guy actually did something incorrectly. And so that's also a big question mark in this case, so far as I can tell. And I don't know that the police officers would have been incorrect to say, I mean, we need to look into it, but if you're talking about convicting the guy, that's not going to be easy to do, and the courts will, have to sort that out. But if the police officers were derelict in their duty, then they definitely need to be held accountable regardless of whether the crime took place or not. And so that's something that I think that this case will really have to evaluate, and that's going to be a crux of how this case winds up going. I will say this, though. If those police officers, if it is found out that they did not do their job, and they ignored, or at the very least mostly ignored, and didn't really take seriously a rape accusation because this guy was a very wealthy, prestigious citizen, I have no sympathy for them whatsoever. Because, I mean, to me, I would argue, I think you could make a conclusive case, and being a debater, I would do this. I think that you can conclude that rape is actually a worse crime than murder. I'm not kidding on that. Seriously, I think that should hold the highest possible penalty under law. And so I take that really seriously, and if these police officers just kind of look the other way because of that, then I don't think that they not only need to lose their jobs, they need to be held criminally accountable. But right now, there's really no evidence to suggest that that's what took place, even though the article really kind of hinted at that. And my assumption is, and, just as a general rule, not because they're police officers, but because they are men, that you would think and you would hope that the natural inclination was to protect the woman. That's the first instinct that would jump into a person's mind when hearing an accusation of rape. Not that you assume that the guy is guilty, or you assume that he's absolutely in the wrong just because the accusation comes up, but that you do take that seriously, and because you are concerned for the possible victim, that you would want to pursue this very quickly, and that your first instinct would not be to hesitate, but to move forward with the investigation if there was absolutely any way you could justify it based on the evidence presented to you. Because there does need to be a reasonable suspicion of a crime taking place for this to proceed forward. And so I think that that's something to consider. So the question now is, will this defamation case stick? Are the people at Buzzfeed going to get sued? And is this going to be something that becomes a problem later on? I mean, are the cops going to win this? Are they going to be able to say, yeah, this was something that Buzzfeed should not have done as a journalistic organization? Well, here's the thing. I read that article. I remember the Buzzfeed article when it came out. I read it right here on the program. And it definitely shows a particular narrative. I mean, you can tell the writer basically had her mind made up that this woman was raped and the suicide was directly related to the rape, and that the people with influence, including the police officers, were not doing their job because this guy was wealthy. I mean, it's a very social justice warrior written kind of thing. You can tell that the writer has an agenda and they've already made up their mind who's guilty and who's innocent. I looked at the facts of the case and had a little more skepticism, and you heard sort of my general overview of what happened in this case. I sadly don't think that this is a case where we can ever know what it was. But anyway, looking at the BuzzFeed article itself, it's pretty clear the BuzzFeed article has an agenda. So that is true. The question is, are they going to be able to make a defamation case like this stick? Because the ultimate defense in a defamation case is truth. And so I think that one thing that is going to be looked into by the court if they do their due diligence on this, and I imagine that they would, the question is going to be, were the police officers actually holding back because of this guy's power and influence? And that is going to be an interesting question, because if yes, then, well, you can't sue for defamation for BuzzFeed saying something that's actually true. So obviously there is no libel if that took place. So then the question becomes, can you prove damages? Because that's something you need to get standing in a court in the first place, is you have to be able to prove to the court that not only did somebody say something wrong, but that incorrect statement was harmful to you, harmful to your character, your reputation, and it has damaged you in some way, monetarily, psychologically, something. The point is, they have to be able to prove that this BuzzFeed article being published in this reckless and negligent manner actually caused something to happen to them that caused some kind of damage. And I don't know exactly what their case is going to be going forward, since I'm not their attorney. But if it caused problems, if there were people that, you know, they were going after them or questioning the police officers or whatever else it was in such a way that it did cause some kind of legal damage, then I think this case is actually going to wind up sticking. But here's the thing that I do want to end on. No matter how this case pans out, no matter whether this person was actually raped or not raped, whether the police officers acted appropriately or didn't act appropriately, the bottom line here is tragic because a precious soul made in the image of God decided to take her own life. And sadly, that's the important undertone that goes through all of this. Doesn't justify bad activity by other people. I mean, it's even possible that this guy didn't rape her, but she made the accusation and she wound up killing herself anyway for different reasons. I don't know. And unfortunately, I don't think anybody else can find out either, and I hate that. But I think that we all need to remember that there was a person that was so distraught for whatever reason, whether it was the rape or maybe she wasn't raped and felt guilty about it and that's why she took her life. I don't know. But there is a person that felt so alienated from God's love that she felt that her life no longer mattered. And that really is tragic. That somebody cannot see their own value being an image bearer of God. That's something that I really think is the crux of this whole story, and I hate that it had such a tragic ending. That's going to be all for today. Like I said, I can only do one story today. I'm really not feeling it. I've been sneezing my head off all day. Hopefully, I'll be better tomorrow. Prayers, as always, are appreciated, and I will see you tomorrow. Stay the course, friends.
Tactics is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media Montgomery. Any opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media. The theme song for Tactics is 6 Foot Town by Big and Rich. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Broadcast studios provided by Cumulus Media Montgomery. Location studios provided by the Dalraida Church of Christ. Copyright 2019.